How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so Samuel Beckett is bleak. There's no doubt about that, but he's also extremely funny. Funny in a way that's not inseparable from his bleakness, in fact. And I think it's this paradox that gives his works the dramatic power and attraction that they have. That's why they're often referred to as tragic comedies. Okay, so what is this paradox exactly? Well, the kind of paradox that I have in mind is the contrast we see in the novels and the plays between high philosophical contemplation and discussion and a physical body that betrays this and, in fact, makes a mockery of it. That's what's so funny. What's so funny is that many of Beckett's characters deliver lofty and abstract quips or monologues, all while their body is doing something dumb or just breaking down. Okay, but let me get into a bit more detail because I really do think that this is an important area, not only of Beckett's greatest insights, but it's one of the main sources of his humor. So let's begin with his famous play, Waiting for Godot. So in that play, the two central characters, Estragon and Vladimir, they spend much of their time engaging in abstract dialogue. You know, they're constantly talking about things like meaning and salvation and religion and like-minded topics. Yet, at the very same time, they're always nervously fumbling around with their boots and their hats. And their limbs are constantly failing them. So why is this funny? Well, again, it's because the substance of what they say is at the very moment that they say it getting deflated by their physical reality, by their ridiculous bodies and the condition that they find themselves in. Big philosophical pontifications are continuously being interrupted by trivial but persistent physical struggles. So I think what Beckett is saying is that no matter how hard we try, we can't escape the body. And so human dignity, no matter the highfalutin speeches we give about it, is really just an illusion, or at the very most, something incredibly fragile. Maybe another way of coming at this is to say that in Beckett's view, the mind and the body are really completely out of sync with each other. The mind tries to be lofty and profound, but at every moment the body undermines that. The mind tries to be fluid and poetic, but the body, of course, is stiff and mechanical. And it's this unavoidable mismatch or conflict that creates the humor in Beckett. That's to say, what's funny about this mismatch is that it deflates any and all pretension to grandeur and to seriousness. When you're trying to be solemn and lofty, but you can't get your boots off, well, that's funny. Actually, maybe a slight sidebar here, but it's interesting. Apparently, Beckett was a big fan of vaudeville, and in particular of the silent film comedian Buster Keaton. And that's revealing because it's pretty similar to the sort of thing that we see in the two tramps in Waiting for Godot. I mean, what characterizes Buster Keaton's characters and others from that tradition is a kind of a repetition and comic persistence in the face of absurdity and futility, right? Well, so too with Beckett's tramps here. Like Buster Keaton's figures, they too face an incomprehensible universe where the effort they put in to make sense of things is absurdly inadequate. So in a way, you might say that what Beckett got from this tradition and what he transposed to a higher register was that the human condition itself is ultimately a kind of slapstick, where, like a lot of Keaton's small, stubborn characters, we all just keep performing endless tasks and gestures without ever achieving resolution. Anyway, so I want to get back to humor again, to the question of why it is Beckett is so funny. So I already mentioned one possible explanation, namely that he's funny because he's constantly presenting the collision between the sublime and the ridiculous, between the lofty mind and the dumb, ineffectual, but intransigent body. Okay, but that said, I think there's another important source of his humor, and that has to do with the futility of communication or dialogue that pervades almost everything he writes. So what does that mean? Well, as anyone who's ever read Beckett knows, his characters in one form or another can't stop talking. But what they say never seems to clarify anything. And when they talk to each other, if that's even the best description of it, their words, they circle around each other at best, never really landing. And really, at the end of the day, I think one could say that what all the talking amounts to is really just a kind of performance devoid of content. A lot of sonorous words, but without any real meaning. Okay, so if something like this is true, then what we're left with in Beckett is a world where talking persists, but where all sense has been collapsed. So this is speaking without understanding. But then what's Beckett doing or implying then? Well, I think that what's often going on in his work is that language has ceased to become a bridge between minds, and instead what it's doing is it's functioning as a kind of therapeutic noise that keeps despair and nihilism at bay. In other words, language is being used to fill the silence. It's being used to stay clear of the void. So language is not just a symptom of isolation, but it's a defense against it. Now, that's tragic, of course, but here's the thing, it's also funny. Now, how is it funny exactly? Well, think about it. We've all had situations where we just anxiously talk to fill the air, or where we find ourselves continuing some conversation long after its meaning has been lost. Well, what Beckett's doing is he's stretching this out to ridiculous and absurd ends until it becomes something uncanny and comical. But really, when we laugh here, we're laughing at ourselves. Beckett's absurdity on the stage, these characters constantly chattering to fend off silence, this is in fact a hyperbolic mirror of our own lives. Our laughter is in part a recognition that we too keep using words to ward off emptiness and confusion and lack of connection. And that is tragic, yes, but it's also absurdly funny. So, why is Beckett funny? Well, because the body is funny. Because it has the last say no matter what the mind says. And because the futility of communication is funny, especially when people still keep talking as if words could still help them. Beckett's characters' bodies betray them, and their language collapses. But they still keep moving, and they still keep speaking. And we laugh at that. But we're laughing at ourselves. We recognize ourselves in all of it. We recognize our endless, ridiculous will and our stubborn dignity to keep going, even when nothing makes sense anymore. Bye for now.